At the edge of the village of Odoi, where the sun fell golden on red dust and the cicadas sang like prophets of heat, stood an ancient baobab tree. It was the kind of tree that looked as though it had been growing since the beginning of the world. Its roots curled above the earth like old fingers, and its bark bore the scars of time claw marks from leopards, the nicks of machetes, and the symbols of old rituals carved into its surface. The villagers called it the Tree of Listening. It was said that if you sat beneath its wide shade and were quiet enough, you could hear the whispers of the gods. But not just any gods, the mischievous ones. The ones who danced in riddles and laughed at prayers spoken to seriously. And of all those gods, there was one name that echoed loudest among the murmurs. Eshu. Eshu, the trickster of Crossroads, the messenger of the gods, the keeper of fate's forks, and the spinner of every coin flip. On this particular day, a boy named Duma sat cross-legged beneath the baobab, his bare feet pressed into the warm dust. He was 14 reigns old, with eyes too curious for comfort, and a grin that came a little too easily. His mother always warned him about mischief, saying it started with laughter and ended with a snake bite. But Duma liked stories, and more than anything, he liked the ones about Eshu. He wasn't alone under the tree. Opposite him sat an old woman wrapped in layers of faded cloth, her hair white and woven with copper beads. She smelled faintly of camwood and roasted yam, and her voice was low and thick like river mud. "You come to listen for him," she said, not a question but a knowing, "for the one who walks where paths split." Duma nodded. "Eshu doesn't speak like the rest," she warned. "His tongue twists truths into riddles. His gifts are never what they seem." "I want to hear," Duma whispered. The woman leaned in, so close that Duma could see the faint green tattoo of a serpent coiled behind her ear. "Then you must trade something. Nothing comes free from the trickster." "I brought a kola nut," Duma offered, pulling it from his pouch and placing it gently between them. The woman raised an eyebrow. "A fair start," she murmured. "But be sure, child, once Eshu begins to notice you, he never truly stops." With that, she clapped her hands 3 times, slow and loud. The sound echoed through the grove like a drumbeat. The wind stirred, the baobab's leaves trembled, and the world tilted for just a moment. The sunlight blinked, not disappeared, blinked as if the sky had paused to think. Duma blinked too, suddenly unsure if he had imagined it. But then he saw it. A figure leaning lazily against the far side of the tree. A man, or something like a man, with skin the color of dark bronze, a grin sharp as a knife, and a hat made from the red feather of a bird that no longer existed. He held a walking stick, carved with symbols that danced when you weren't looking, directly at them. "You called," the figure said, voice smooth as palm wine and just as intoxicating. "But did you mean it?" Duma opened his mouth, but no sound came. The old woman beside him bowed her head deeply. Not with fear, no, with respect, like greeting a guest who might steal your sandals and your soul in the same breath. "Eshu," she whispered, "we ask only a tale." Eshu twirled his stick, the air shimmering around him. "A tale, is it? Then I shall begin with the oldest one, the one before all others. The tale of how the trickster chose the world." He snapped his fingers, and the dust rose. It did not fall back down. Instead, it hung, glowing, and began to swirl in shapes: animals, stars, faces, all circling like moths around a flame. "In the beginning," Eshu said, pacing slowly, "the gods gathered and asked, 'Who shall speak for us? Who shall carry our messages? Who shall walk between the world of men and the sky of spirits?'" He stopped walking, eyes sparkling. I arrived late, of course, as always, but I brought a gift no one else had. Choice? The dust shifted. It showed a scene of a god offering to fruits, one red, one green, to a man who looked uncertain. I showed men the crossroads. I taught them to ask, what if? And why not? I made sure every door had two keys, one for truth, one for trickery. Duma was entranced. He leaned forward, barely breathing. And ever since, Eshu continued, every traveler who stands at a path that splits must whisper my name, even if they do not know it. He turned then, directly to Duma. You, boy, he said, pointing with his staff. You will walk such paths. You will speak my name once with reverence, once with regret, and once without knowing. Duma swallowed hard. Will you help me? Eshu laughed, long and low. Perhaps. Or perhaps I'll make it worse before it gets better. That's the fun of it, isn't it? The old woman reached out and touched Duma's shoulder gently. Enough for one day. The figure of Eshu nodded, tipping his feathered hat. Until the next crossroad, child. And then he was gone, no shimmer, no puff of smoke, just gone. Like a song ending mid-note, the dust fell. The sun blinked back to normal. The baobab tree creaked, as if waking from a nap. Duma blinked, then blinked again. Had it all happened? The old woman handed him back the kola nut. He didn't take it. That means you still owe him. Duma looked down at it, then clutched it tight. He had listened at the tree of whispers, and now Eshu had noticed him. From this day, nothing would be simple. The journey had only just begun, and yet already, the land around Eshu shimmered with change. The sun had not yet reached its peak in the sky, and the red clay path beneath his bare feet curled forward into the thick of the forest dense, humming with unseen life. The deeper he walked, the more the air grew still, not with silence, but with secrets. The trees seemed older here. Their trunks were thick, gnarled, and cloaked with moss. Their leaves formed a canopy that filtered sunlight into green gold flecks. Every few steps, Eshu paused, not in fear, but in curiosity. He could feel it in his bones. This place was not meant for all wanderers. This was the Whispering Grove. He chuckled to himself. Well, then, perfect for a trickster. He tilted his head slightly. A whisper fluttered by. Not the wind. No, this was language, familiar and strange, brushing past his ear like a forgotten song. Eshu stepped lightly now. With every footfall, he watched. The forest was not just alive, it was aware. A vine slithered across the ground behind him, vanishing before he could turn. Leaves shimmered, not with dew, but with movement. Flickers of spirits hiding in plain sight. The Whispering Grove was not called so by accident. It was said that this forest could remember things. Conversations, lies, promises, songs that hadn't been sung in generations. Stories whispered into the air became part of its breath. He came upon a wide tree, one that leaned far to the right, as though bowing to greet him. Its bark was carved with old symbols, many of which even Eshu did not recognize. Others he knew intimately. Trickster marks, offerings for the gods, protection runes drawn by trembling hands. One particular symbol caught his eye. It pulsed faintly with light. He grinned. Ah, a message for me. Then he placed his hand upon it. Suddenly, the air thickened, and the forest exhaled. A low, rhythmic hum began, rising from the earth like a heartbeat. From the trees, spirits began to emerge, no taller than his knee, cloaked in woven grass, with eyes like tiny suns. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Eshu bowed slightly, with a smirk. I take it I am expected. One of the spirits floated toward him. It hovered just inches above the ground and extended a long, thin finger. It pointed toward the center of the grove, where the trees opened into a wide clearing. There, resting upon a smooth stone slab, sat a mask that it was simple. Wood, etched, painted in reds and blacks. But the moment Eshu laid eyes upon it, he knew. This was not merely a mask. It was an anchor, a memory, a forgotten god waiting to be remembered. Is this mine? He asked aloud, no answer. Only the humming continued. He stepped forward, 1 foot at a time. As he approached, the trees behind him shifted, paths closed. He was being drawn in, not trap-tested. When he reached the stone slab, he knelt and examined the mask. It was warm to the touch. It pulsed once beneath his fingers, like it knew him, like it remembered the stories his mother told him in childhood, the ones about the beginning of the world, when tricksters wore masks and danced to confuse time itself. He lifted the mask gently and placed it over his face. Darkness, but not silence. Instead, 1,000 voices murmured at once, stories layered upon stories. A snake who once betrayed a god, a child who tricked death, a woman who danced herself into legend. Names he'd heard in fragments now wove themselves into a single tapestry. The mask let him see. He saw himself in countless forms: bird, wind, boy, shadow. He was always moving, always twisting the tail. He saw the elders who once worshipped the old gods, their chants rising like fire. He saw the moment the gods were forgotten, buried beneath iron and glass cities. And he saw the need. The world needed remembering. He removed the mask, and the forest shifted again. The spirits had drawn closer. Their eyes flickered, their tiny hands raised. They were not threatening. They were waiting. Eshu held the mask in his hands. So this is the path, he said. One of the spirits extended a small basket. Inside it were 3 items: a carved bone flute, a folded scrap of bark covered in ancient script, and a feather black as night, tipped with red. He took them. A gift, or a burden, possibly both. He bowed again. Thank you. I suppose we'll meet again. The moment he turned away, the spirits vanished. The trees seemed to relax. The whispers faded into a gentle breeze. The forest had marked him. It had remembered him. And now, he had work to do. Eshu stepped back onto the red clay path, the mask tied to his belt, the items tucked safely away. The sun had moved while he was inside, but the warmth on his skin felt different now, like he carried something inside him that hadn't been there before. As he walked, he realized he could still hear the whispering, not behind him but within him, a quiet hum, guiding him forward, reminding him of all the tales he now bore. He was not just Eshu the trickster anymore. He was a walking memory, and his tale had only just begun. The sun had not yet burned away the morning mist when Eshu found himself walking through the thick groves that marked the edge of the old whispering forest. Here, where sunlight was filtered through veils of green, time felt slower, heavier, like a breath that never quite finished. The birds that nested high above the canopy did not sing here, and even the wind seemed to tread carefully between the moss-covered trunks. Eshu, barefoot as always, moved with his characteristic swagger, humming to himself and flipping a coin between his fingers. He knew this forest well, or so he liked to say. Truthfully, it was one of the few places that unnerved even him. The trees here had memory, and memory Eshu knew was both a blessing and a trap. As he moved deeper, the light thinned, and the mist clung more tightly to his limbs. Eshu's usual grin faded to a thoughtful frown. He could sense it now. The magic, thick as fermented palm wine. The talking tree was near. 3 lefts, 1 backward step, and a lie told aloud. He muttered to himself, "That's the path." He took the left fork, then another, and yet another. When he stopped, he spun on his heel and took a step backward. Then, he smirked and said loudly, "I have never stolen anything in my life." The forest stirred. Leaves rustled without breeze. A hush fell like a curtain. Then, as if drawn by some invisible string, the vines before him parted, revealing a gnarled, towering tree whose trunk split like a yawning mouth. Its bark pulsed faintly, like breath beneath skin. This was the talking tree. "You again," the tree murmured, its voice the sound of cracking wood and earth shifting. "The trickster." Eshu gave a playful bow. "And you again, old bark, still whispering secrets to those who dare listen?" The tree groaned as if stretching from a long sleep. "Not all deserve the secrets they seek." "I never said I deserve anything," Eshu replied with a wink. "I'm just here to make a trade." The talking tree paused. Its eyes, if they could be called that, opened slowly within the bark. "What do you offer, mischief child?" Eshu stepped forward and opened his palm, revealing a simple wooden bead. But the bead shimmered oddly, as if catching light from a sun that wasn't there. "This," he said, "is a memory stolen from a crocodile god." It's the moment he realized he was afraid. The tree creaked in surprise. "Fear from a god? I will accept it." With a sigh like rustling pages, the tree opened further, revealing a hollow space filled with hanging tendrils of glowing moss and humming insects. Eshu stepped inside, where silence was more than the absence of sound. It was a presence, a thing alive. "The secret I seek," Eshu began, "is about the stone of many paths. I've heard it exists, buried in the ground where crossroads bleed into one another. But I don't know where." The tree's voice rumbled from all sides. "The stone chooses who may find it. Not even I know its exact place. But you know stories," Eshu said, sitting cross-legged on a mossy root. "And stories, they carry maps hidden in them, don't they?" There was a long pause. Then, a whisper like 1,000 voices layered over one another began to speak. "A long time ago," the tree said, "before the rivers chose their beds and the stars their positions, there was a pathwalker named Olo. She had no home, only sandals and songs. It was said she could hear the language of the earth when she stood still enough." Eshu leaned forward, intrigued. She wandered far, until one day she arrived at a place where 7 paths crossed. There, she buried her walking stick and declared, "Let this be where all journeys begin and end." When she died, the stone rose from the earth where the stick had stood. "And the place?" Eshu asked eagerly. "The place," the tree answered, "is no place. It moves, like water under moonlight. Only those who arrive without wanting may see it." Eshu frowned. "That's a riddle." "It is truth." Silence. Again, except for the soft hum of the moss and the slow breathing of the tree. Eshu stood, pacing in the hollow. "So I can't look for it, but I can find it if I'm not looking." "Yes, that's ridiculous." "Yes," Eshu sighed, shaking his head. "You ancient things love to play difficult. Still, I thank you." He turned to leave, but the tree spoke once more softly this time. "There's more." A warning. Eshu paused. "The stone does not bring power alone, it brings clarity. And clarity is dangerous to those who wear masks." Eshu, who wore many masks, felt that knot in his chest again, the one he ignored more often than not. "I've worn mine for so long," he whispered. "I'm not sure what my face even looks like." The tree made no reply. The hollow darkened. The way out shimmered faintly behind him. Outside, the mist had thickened. The forest was quieter than before, as if holding its breath. Eshu emerged slowly, blinking at the sudden burst of sun that managed to trickle through the canopy. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He looked at the path ahead. Any direction could be right or wrong, but now he knew. To find the stone of many paths, he had to forget he wanted it. He had to walk for walking's sake. Be the wind, not the arrow. He smiled. That was the kind of game he could enjoy. Behind him, the talking tree closed its mouth with a sigh that echoed between the trunks. And far away, on a hill that didn't exist yesterday, a tiny stone glowed faintly beneath the earth, waiting. The morning sun stretched across the horizon, painting streaks of gold across the lush, awakening savanna. Birds trilled from tree branches, and the air smelled of wildflowers and warm earth. Eshu, the ever-restless trickster, walked with a rhythm only he could hear, his staff tapping a beat against the ground. The villagers of Otunga had once again tried to ignore his presence, but Eshu, who thrived on attention as much as on mischief, would not let that stand. He smiled, the corners of his mouth curling into a grin that hinted at secrets yet to unfold. As he wandered, Eshu came upon a wide river, its waters glinting under the morning light. It was a sacred river, known to the people as the River of Memory. Stories whispered that the water carried more than just fish and silt. It carried truth and remembrance. Those who drank from it might recall things forgotten or learn truths they never wished to know. Eshu knelt beside the river, tracing his fingers across its surface. It was time to stir the waters. Not just the literal ones, but the waters of complacency, fear, pride. He knew that downstream, the villagers of Otunga were preparing for a ceremony, a tribute to the river goddess, Yemaya. Offerings were gathered, songs were rehearsed, and pride swelled in the hearts of the elders. But pride, Eshu thought, often needed a little humbling. He set to work, disguising himself as an old man, bent and wrapped in a tattered robe. Eshu limped his way toward Otunga. The villagers, busy with preparation, barely noticed him as he reached the outskirts. Children pointed, but their parents hushed them. Old beggars were common in these lands, and none wanted their good mood spoiled. "Water," he croaked, stopping at a well. "May I?" A young woman drawing water glanced at him and nodded quickly, uncomfortable with his presence. He drank deeply, then looked at her with sharp, clear eyes that momentarily betrayed his disguise. "Be careful what you forget," he said cryptically, then turned and limped away. The river ceremony began at midday. Villagers gathered at the banks, dressed in bright robes, their faces painted with swirls and dots of meaning. The elders spoke in solemn tones, praising Yemaya for her bounty, her patience, her mystery. A large woven basket of fruits, coins, flowers, and spices was carried to the edge and gently released into the water, drifting away with grace. But just as the basket floated out, a strange thing occurred. The river changed. Its color turned not red or black, but silvery, like melted moonlight. The water began to bubble, and steam curled from its surface. "Is that?" someone whispered. "A sign from Yemaya." Eshu, still disguised, sat beneath a tree at the edge of the crowd, hiding a grin. He had dropped a small vial into the river that morning. It wasn't poison or magic, just a natural extract from a plant known to shimmer in water. and caused mild visions if consumed or touched. Children squealed as the river began to show images, faces in the water, forgotten ancestors, half-remembered dreams. One young boy saw his grandmother, who had passed the year before, smiling and beckoning. Another man screamed as he saw a hidden crime float across the surface. He had stolen grain. During a famine, panic began to spread. The elders tried to calm the crowd, claiming it was Yemaya's test. But their voices faltered when the river spoke in whispers none could understand. Yet all felt were directed at them. The Shu rose from his place and walked calmly to the river. With exaggerated care, he dipped his staff into the shimmering water. The river hissed and returned to normal, just like that. No one else had dared approach. All eyes turned to the old man. "What have you done?" cried one elder, now shaken. "Who are you?" Eshu grinned and stood tall, shedding the illusion of age. His robes fell back into their vibrant red and black pattern. His cowrie shell necklace gleamed, and his hair twisted into neat braids. "I am the one you ignore until trouble comes," he said. "I am Eshu, and this is the crossroad you have reached." Gasps echoed. Some villagers fell to their knees. "You offer gifts to a goddess, yet forget the lessons her river teaches," Eshu continued. "Truth cannot be buried beneath fruit and flowers. What you hide flows downstream." A silence fell, but it was not empty, it was thick with reflection, guilt, awe. Then Eshu smiled, his tone lightening. "But all is not lost. Today, you remembered. That is enough for now." He turned to leave, but paused. "Do not fear the river. Fear forgetting what it knows." With that, Eshu disappeared into the trees, his laughter echoing like the rustling of dry leaves. Later that night, as the villagers sat around fires, they whispered about what they had seen. Some cried quietly, some stared into the flames, questioning themselves, and some, perhaps the wisest, smiled, for they understood Eshu's gift was not chaos, but the uncomfortable mirror he held up to the soul. The path through the forest was no longer the same. Eshu, the trickster of Crossroads, stood at the edge of an ancient trail where the earth itself seemed confused. The trees leaned in strange directions, roots split in awkward shapes, and the wind whispered in tongues no one had spoken for centuries. He grinned. This was the kind of place where stories happened, where reality shifted like smoke, and intentions twisted like twine. Behind him walked Ao, the curious orphan boy who had followed Eshu since their encounter at the Whispering Crossroads. Ao's bare feet pressed cautiously into the forest floor. The ground felt oddly warm, pulsing, like a heartbeat buried beneath the soil. "Are we lost?" Ao asked, eyes scanning the woods. Eshu tapped his staff against a bent tree. "You can't be lost if you never knew where you were going, boy. This is the broken path. It remembers every step people forget." Ao didn't quite understand, but he had learned by now not to expect direct answers from Eshu. The god of mischief and messages rarely spoke plainly. His words were riddles wrapped in grins. They walked until the trail abruptly ended at a cliff that wasn't supposed to be there. Ao gasped. "This wasn't here yesterday." "Yesterday obeyed the rules," Eshu said. "But today the forest is listening to me." Before Ao could ask what that meant, the cliff shimmered. Its edge cracked, and stones rearranged themselves, forming a spiraling staircase made of roots and bones that vanished into the mist below. "After you," Eshu said, motioning gallantly. Ao hesitated, but descended. They stepped down into a realm beneath the forest, a place where time curled like old bark, and the air was thick with forgotten names. A village lay crumbling in silence, a village Eshu claimed had never existed, and yet had always been there. The huts were overgrown with moss, their walls etched with ancient symbols. Statues of gods long vanished stood crooked in the center. Who lived here? Ao whispered. Those who believed too strongly in certainty, Eshu replied. This is where they ended up when they stopped asking questions. As they moved through the ruins, ghostly figures flickered into view, villagers going about daily routines. One carried a pot of water that never spilled. Another knelt beside a field that yielded no crops. None of them noticed Eshu or Ao. They repeated their movements endlessly, trapped in a loop. Ao reached for one of the apparitions, but his hand passed through it like smoke. They're stuck, Ao said, eyes wide. They chose a path and refused to bend, Eshu said. Now the path bends them. Suddenly, the ground quaked. The sky overhead turned dark, and a new figure appeared in the square, a tall woman cloaked in red and black feathers. Her eyes glowed with gold, and snakes slithered along her arms like bracelets. Oya, Eshu muttered under his breath, his smile faltering. Who is she? Ao asked. Oya is the goddess of storms and change, Eshu said quietly. She doesn't like when I meddle with old truths. Oya's gaze locked onto Eshu. Why do you bring a child into broken memories? He wanted a story. Eshu replied casually. I'm just showing him where the best ones hide. Oya stepped forward. The wind howled in her wake. Stories are not toys. They shape the world. Twist too many, and you unravel what was once whole. Eshu gave a slight bow. Then let's see what breaks. Before Oya could respond, the village began to fall apart again. The statues crumbled, the huts collapsed, and the ghosts scattered like leaves in wind. But this time, something emerged from beneath the village, a tree made entirely of bone and fire, pulsing with ancient rhythm. Ao stared at it in awe. What is that? Eshu whispered. The tree of choices. It grows only where decisions die. As they approached, a single fruit dangled from a low branch. Eshu reached up and plucked it, then handed it to Ao. Eat, if you dare, Eshu said. What will happen? You'll see all the paths you might have walked and maybe find the one you should. Ao hesitated. The fruit glowed softly, as though it breathed. He took a bite. The world exploded not in sound or destruction, but in vision. Ao saw himself living 1,000 lives. In one, he was a farmer. In another, a warrior. In another, a poet by a fire. In yet another, he died as a baby in a fevered hut. Every choice he had ever made or never made bloomed before him in spiraling color. He dropped to his knees, breathless. Too many paths. He gasped. How do I know which is mine? Eshu knelt beside him, his tone gentler than usual. You don't. That's the game. The trick isn't choosing the right path, it's walking any path with your eyes open. Oya appeared again, her expression softer. You've shown him the burden of choice. Now let him return. Eshu nodded. The mist swirled again, wrapping around Ao and Eshu. The ruins faded, the forest reassembled, and the broken path straightened behind them like nothing had happened. But Ao was different now. He looked at the trail ahead not with fear, but with curiosity. The uncertainty no longer scared him. In fact, it thrilled him. Eshu smiled. Well done, boy. You didn't run. I didn't want to, Ao replied. There's more to learn. There always is. As they walked on, the trees whispered again, but this time, the words were in Ao's voice. His own story was beginning to write itself. Night draped the village in velvet darkness, but within the ceremonial grounds, fires blazed high, casting golden light across painted faces and elaborate costumes. The Festival of Masks had begun, an ancient tradition rooted in stories older than the trees, older than the stars. Every villager wore a mask, each symbolizing a spirit, a story, or a secret. Children giggled behind tiny wooden faces. Lovers exchanged knowing glances through feathered disguises, and elders watched in silence. Their masks plain but powerful. Eshu stood at the edge of the circle, unmasked. That, in itself, was a statement. The trickster did not need to hide his face, was a mask unto itself. But tonight, he had returned not to play games, not to meddle in fate, but to teach. The time had come for him to pass on his gift to someone ready, or at least foolish enough to try. Among the dancers was a girl named Nia, the blacksmith's youngest daughter. Her mask, shaped like a hummingbird, shimmered with crushed minerals and silken threads. Nia had always been different. While others asked for strength, wealth, or marriage in their prayers, she whispered questions to the wind. Why do stories fade? Where do old gods go? What happens if we speak the truth when everyone else lies? Eshu had listened. He always did, as the drummer's rhythm deepened and the dancer's steps grew wilder. Eshu approached Nia with a grin that curled like smoke. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply held out a mask. It was a strange thing, half black, half white, with one eye weeping and the other laughing. It pulsed gently in his hand like a living thing. Nia paused. Her breath caught round her. The world felt like it had stilled, though the music continued. Her own mask suddenly felt too small, too safe. With trembling fingers, she removed it and accepted the one Eshu offered. The moment she put it on, the firelight changed. She was no longer in her village. She stood at a crossroads under a sky the color of rusted copper. Roads stretched in all directions, each bordered by impossible landscapes, floating mountains, deserts made of whispering paper, oceans with upside-down waves. Eshu was there, of course, seated on a stool carved from laughter. "Welcome," he said, his voice warm but mischievous. "You've taken the first step." "Where am I?" Nia asked. "The place between," he replied. "Between dreams and waking. Between what is and what might be. This is where I live. And if you're to walk the trickster's path, you must begin here." Nia tried to ask more, but the world spun. She fell not down, but inward. Dan landed in the middle of a marketplace from long ago. It was both familiar and foreign. People bartered with riddles, argued in song, and paid with memories. Nia walked among them, her mask revealing not just their faces, but their truths. A man selling fruit wept silently. His wife had left him, and he hadn't spoken of it. A young girl skipped rope. While hiding a heavy stone in her pocket, she was training herself to carry grief. A merchant shouted of riches but bled from a wound he refused to acknowledge. Everywhere Nia looked, she saw the masks beneath the masks, the stories people told themselves, the lies they clung to, the truths they feared. Eshu appeared beside her again, eating something that looked like a cloud and tasted like regret. "You see now why masks matter. They protect us," Nia whispered, "but they can also trap us." "Exactly," he said, offering her a piece of cloud. She declined. "But what do I do with this knowledge?" Eshu turned, suddenly serious. "That's your path to choose. Some use it to heal, some to manipulate, some burn the masks, others make new ones. You are no longer just a girl. You are a mirror, a storm, a doorway." Nia looked down at her hands. They glowed faintly, inscribed with symbols that shifted and rewrote themselves. Back in the village, her body danced, though no One controlled it. Her limbs moved with the fluidity of flame, her feet leaving no trace on the dust. The villagers watched in awe and fear. They sensed something had changed. That Nia was not entirely Nia anymore. A child called out her name, and she paused. The mask slipped slightly. She was back at the crossroads. Eshu stood before her, holding a box made of woven contradictions. Inside this, he said, is your final lesson, but open it only when you must choose between truth and comfort. She reached out, then hesitated. Will I lose myself? He shrugged. Perhaps, but maybe you'll find a better version. She took the box. The vision faded. The fires returned. The village was real again. Nia stood in the center, mask in hand, the crowd silent. Then, one by one, the villagers began to remove their own masks, not out of fear or shame but in recognition. They saw her, and in doing so, saw themselves. Eshu, now seated on a fence, post with a pipe made of moonlight, chuckled softly. The trickster's path had found a new walker. And somewhere in the distance, a road that had long been closed cracked open once more. The jungle breathed in whispers as night spilled its inky veil across the land. Crickets chirped in rhythm, frogs croaked like old drums, and far off, the gentle hiss of the river winding through the darkness was the only thing that dared to move. Swiftly under the sleeping moon, Eshu, the trickster, had traveled far since leaving the twin villages and their eternal quarrel. His journey had brought him to a strange river one locals called Okuniro, the river that remembers lies. The river did not flow with mere water, or so the elders claimed. It carried with it every half-truth, broken promise, and forked tongue that had ever passed through the region. It was said that if one drank from its surface, or dared speak while its waters passed, their secrets would surface like bloated fish. Eshu found himself amused. A river that gossiped. How delightful. He crouched at the edge, watching the water curl like fingers pulling secrets from the mud. His own reflection shimmered, but never quite settled. His eyes looked more cunning than usual, as if the river was trying to mock him. Behind him, a voice called out tired, uncertain, "Who stands by the mouth of the river?" Eshu didn't turn immediately. One who listens better than he speaks. The speaker stepped forward. She was tall, skin dark, and shining, and her hair was braided into long coils adorned with beads of bone and bronze. Her name, she said, was a duke. She was the river's guardian not by birthright, but by punishment. My tongue betrayed a sister, she said quietly, sitting beside Eshu. And so the river took mine. Now I guard its truth, so others may not fall as I did. Eshu raised an eyebrow. You speak clearly enough to me. A duke smiled sadly. I only speak the truth. That is all the river allows. Eshu's grin widened. Then what a miserable life you must lead. The river hissed. Eshu leaned closer, feeling its cool mist brushing his cheek like a breath that knew his name. I come seeking the path forward, he said aloud. I have stirred feuds, flipped roads, and challenged kings. Yet the trick I play next must be greater. The world yawns. I must wake it. A duke reached into a pouch and drew out a stone etched with spiral lines. Throw this into the river, she said. If the river does not return it, your path is true. Eshu took the stone. And if it does, then even the river finds you too dishonest to carry. He laughed loud, sharp, like sticks breaking underfoot. With a flick, the stone vanished into the ripples. The water swallowed it eagerly. Eshu and a duke sat in silence. Minutes passed. The wind held its breath. Somewhere in the forest, An owl blinked. Then, like a fish leaping in reverse, the stone returned launched out of the water. With such force it struck a tree trunk behind them with a sharp, angry clack. A duke's face did not change. The river has spoken. But Eshu only smiled wider. I must be on the right path. Then, she frowned. It rejected you. Exactly, Eshu whispered, standing now. I am not meant to flow like others. I am meant to disrupt the current. The sky above rumbled slightly, not thunder, but the tremor of something older shifting in the clouds. Eshu sensed it. The gods were listening now. The trickster had wandered too far into myth, and the myth was beginning to take notice. He thanked a duke and turned, heading upstream, against the current. Hours passed as he walked the bank, each step squelching in the moist earth. The moon danced through the leaves above, casting flickering patterns like masks upon the ground. He came upon a small hut made of river reeds and roofed with turtle shells. An old man sat outside, weaving nets of glowing spider silk. He looked up with eyes that glimmered like wet obsidian. You're late, the old man said. I wasn't expected. Eshu replied. That's what makes you late. Eshu liked this man already. They sat beside each other as the river flowed in silence. You're the trickster, the old man finally said, more statement than question. And you're someone who knows where paths bend. The man nodded. You're close to the heart of the river. If you reach it, you'll find what you're not supposed to know. And what you know, you'll wish you hadn't. Eshu leaned in, playful. I never wish that. The man gave him a net, still wet and glistening. Catch a lie that swims against the current. Only then will you be allowed to see the mouth of truth. It sounded like nonsense, which meant it was probably true. Eshu waded into the shallows, holding the net. At first, all was still. Then ripples, then splashes. Then something wriggled in the net. It wasn't a fish, it was a silver-tongued. It thrashed, hissed, spat fragments of phrases, political promises, sweet nothings, denials, of guilt, all lies, all slippery. Eshu gripped the net tight and emerged. The old man was gone. Only a new path had opened, one that hadn't existed before, now leading directly into a cave lit by the flicker of blue fireflies. Eshu stepped inside. The cave breathed, carvings covered the walls, faces with two mouths, creatures with backward feet, hands reaching toward themselves. In the center sat a throne made of woven voices. You couldn't see it exactly, but you could hear it when you looked. It murmured the things people never said aloud. Eshu approached, holding the net. The silver tongue hissed louder now, coiling like a snake. But the throne of voices spoke. Louder, it whispered. You were born from the silence between truths. You do not seek power. You are the power that seeks. Eshu stepped back. The path behind him had vanished. There was only forward now. A doorway opened in the wall of the cave, round and pulsing, like the pupil of a god's eye. Eshu entered without hesitation. Inside was the heart of the river. It wasn't water. It wasn't light, it was memory. Thousands of floating orbs drifted in the air, each a moment where a lie changed history. A man who claimed he would return. A child who swore they didn't take it. A queen who pretended she didn't love her enemy. Eshu walked among them, brushing one. A vision bloomed. He saw himself past, present, future, all versions dancing in circles around decisions never made and stories never finished. He saw why he had been born. He saw what he must now do. He let go of the net. The silver tongue drifted upward and dissolved when Eshu emerged from the cave. Morning had come. The sun spilled gold over the river like honey from a tilted jar. Birds cried out greetings in odd tongues. and even the trees seemed to tilt toward him. A duke waited at the edge of the forest. She saw something had changed in his face. "Did you find what you were not supposed to?" Eshu tilted his head, grinning, double quotes, "No. I made it instead." They stood for a long moment. Then Eshu walked away. Behind him, the river rippled not with secrets, but with laughter, and somewhere very far away, a king sneezed in his sleep and forgot why he'd ever been angry. In the dry winds of the northern plains, where trees grew bent from the whispering gales and the soil cracked with the thirst of centuries, the trickster walked alone. The winds carried no scent, no bird call, no promise, only dust and the long-forgotten breath of time. Behind him were legends rewritten. Before him, the final test that no being human or spirit had passed and returned to tell. The elders had warned of the eternal waters long ago. It was said to be the only place where time forgot itself, where water shimmered not with reflection, but with truth. One glance into its surface, they whispered, and a soul would be judged not by gods, not by fate, but by its own hidden truth. The trickster had danced through fire, bargained with the dead, outwitted gods and demons, but never before had he faced a mirror that offered no illusions. The way to the waters was not a road. It was not a trail, nor a path walked by feet. It was a memory, a thread buried in dreams, pulled forth only by one whose heart held the storm of questions louder than the comfort of answers. The trickster had such a storm, forever churning, forever roaring, fed by the games he played and the lives he touched, so he followed the silence. For 3 days and 3 nights, the trickster walked beneath the gaze of stars that blinked in rhythms not known to humans. He passed hills that hummed when touched and rocks that whispered his own name back at him. The land was alive with waiting. It had heard the footsteps of heroes before and seen them dissolve into sand. It had seen warriors rise with pride and leave as memories scattered on wind. But now it watched the trickster, curious. On the 4th night, when the sky cracked with violet clouds and no moon rose, he found it. A lake that wasn't a lake. It was water, yes, but it moved with thought. It shifted in rhythm with breath. There were no ripples, no fish, no edge to its surface, only a vast pool of unending shimmer, reflecting not the stars above but the soul of any who dared draw near. He stood at its edge, boots coated with dust, heart strangely quiet. "This is it, isn't it?" he asked aloud, not expecting an answer. But a voice came, deep and old and echoing as if from within the water itself. "Yes, you stand at the mouth of your own truth. Drink if you dare." The trickster smiled, but not his usual crooked grin. This smile was smaller, less confident. "Do you always greet guests with riddles?" "No," said the voice. "Only those who know how to lie to themselves." The trickster inhaled slowly. For all his tricks, all his games, he could not outwit his own reflection, not here. Still, he knelt and dipped a hand into the water. It felt neither cold nor warm. It felt like memory, like the moment before a thought becomes a word. And then it began. The sun had not yet risen, but the village of Nyanda stirred as if summoned by a silent call. The cool hush of pre-dawn held its breath while shadows stretched long over the dusty earth. At the heart of the village stood the ancient Baobab tree, its gnarled limbs twisting like sleeping serpents toward the sky. Beneath it, a circle had been drawn with white chalk, the sign of a traditional tribunal. The elders sat cross-legged on woven mats, their faces carved by time and wisdom, eyes reflecting stories older than memory itself. Anansi, the trickster whose name carried equal parts reverence and wariness, stood before them. He did not smile, as he usually did. His web-patterned robe, once flamboyant, was now dulled with dust and frayed threads. Around him, the people had gathered in silence, every child clinging to a parent's leg, every adult murmuring prayers beneath their breath. No drums played, no birds sang. This was not a festival, this was judgment. The tale had spread across the land. Anansi had stolen the sacred calabash of memories, meant to be shared only by the wisdom keepers at the change of seasons. The vessel held not water or grain, but the breath of ancestors, whispered teachings, mistakes, lessons, regrets, all sealed within. Without it, the village's stories would begin to fade, and without stories, the people feared they would forget who they were. Anansi did not deny his crime. That was never his way. He had taken it, yes, but he claimed it was not theft. It was revelation. He claimed the stories were dying not because they were stolen, but because they were locked away. The elder named Mabali, whose beard was white like crushed chalk and eyes as sharp as hawk talons, raised his hand. You, Anansi, born of both spider and man, we summon you to answer. Did you or did you not take the sacred calabash under moonlight? 3 nights passed. Anansi looked up at the baobab's leaves. A breeze stirred them, and the whispering began, a language known only to the old tree and those who listened deeply. I did, he said, and I would again. Gasps rose. A few turned their heads, afraid that lightning might strike. But none came. Only silence answered. Mbali did not blink. Why? Anansi stepped forward. He knelt and placed a finger into the dust, drawing a crooked line. Because the calabash is not a prison, and the stories inside are not birds to be caged. They grow brittle when locked away. I opened it so the stories could breathe again. Another elder, Tembo, whose voice cracked like a dry reed, rasped, so you would risk forgetting all we are in order to remember all we were. Anansi smiled, faintly. Better a risked memory than a forgotten truth. The crowd shifted uneasily. No one had ever challenged the council's methods before. Not like this. But Anansi was not just anyone. He was older than the village, if one believed the stories. He was the spider who spun the first tale when the world was still waking. He was mischief and message. And now he stood trial. From behind the elders came a group of wisdom keepers. Women and men draped in ochre robes, each carrying a woven basket. From these baskets they drew items. A gourd sealed with wax, a rusted key, a bone flute, and a cracked mirror. Each represented a story, one of healing, one of betrayal, one of music, one of lost love. One by one, they placed the items at Anansi's feet. You say the stories must breathe, said Mabali. Then tell them, all of them. Let us hear what you claim you have set free. The crowd hushed again. A baby cried and was quickly rocked into silence. Even the wind seemed to lean closer. Anansi sat. He touched the gourd first. This is the tale of Imani the healer, he began, voice slow and steady. She learned to mend bones not by study, but by listening. When a bird broke its wing, she followed the rhythm of its pain. Not the words of her teachers. They mocked her. But one day, the chief's son fell from the tall tree, and no healer could mend him. Imani, with her quiet ears and careful hands, placed bark, leaf, and song together, and he walked again. The people listened. Some nodded. He touched the rusted key. This is the tale of Zuberi, who locked away his heart so none could hurt it. Each kindness offered, he hid behind suspicion. Each embrace, he deflected with scorn. But in age, when his joints ached and no one came to feed him, he realized his own hands had turned the key. He touched the bone flute. Once, the rains did not come. The crops wilted, and the drums were silent. A young girl, no older than the moon's blink, picked up this flute and played not with skill, but with sorrow. The wind heard her, the clouds listened, and that night, the rains came, and then the mirror. This was held by the warrior Naledi, who feared nothing but her own reflection, not because she was ugly, but because in her eyes, she saw who she would become if she stopped pretending. One day, she stared long enough to meet herself, and smiled. Each story settled over the villagers like soft rain. No fire, no thunder, only stillness. The stories were not grand, but they were true. And truth, even when quiet, reshapes the world. Mbali's voice cut the air again. And the calabash, where is it now? Anansi reached into his cloak. From its folds, he produced the calabash, smaller than expected, bound with vine, etched with ancient symbols. He placed it gently on the earth. I opened it, he said, but I did not empty it. I only let it sing. Mbali approached. He bent, picked up the calabash, and held it to his ear. For a moment, he stood frozen. Then he chuckled, a sound dry and warm, like fire catching old wood. The ancestors are still here. He whispered. He turned to the other elders. Let the people judge. Gasps again. This was unheard of. But the crowd did not roar. No chants, no jeers. They stepped forward, one by one, placing a hand on the calabash. Some wept, some laughed. One woman began singing a lullaby no one had heard since childhood. The elders conferred. When they turned back, Mbali's voice was steady. You are guilty of disobedience, he said, but also of remembrance. You shall not be punished, but nor shall you be praised. You must walk the land, gathering stories not from the past, but from now. Bring them back each season. Let them breathe. Let them grow. Anansi bowed, not in shame, but in gratitude, as the first light of dawn spilled across the Baobab. He rose and turned toward the horizon. The villagers stepped aside, forming a path. Children reached to touch his robe. Elders nodded silently. He walked slowly, deliberately, like someone both carrying a great weight and freed from it. Behind him, the calabash sat in the dust, humming softly. The trial was over, but the story was just beginning. Writing prompt for illustration or continuation. In the final glimmers of twilight, Anansi stood at the edge of the world he once tricked and teased into trembling. The ground beneath his feet had changed. The soil no longer whispered secrets from the underworld. The winds no longer carried the laughter of mischief. Everything felt quieter now, too quiet for a trickster's liking. But silence had never been a stranger to him. It was merely the pause before a story began. Anansi's journey had taken him across plains scorched by greed, through forests where forgotten spirits slept in gnarled roots, and over rivers that remembered every broken promise. Now, he had returned to the place where the stars first heard his voice, a humble village tucked in the crook of the Baobab's embrace. The village had changed. The huts were taller now, fortified and shadowed by wealth that came with suspicion. Children no longer ran barefoot laughing in the dust. They played indoors now, under the watchful eyes of adults afraid of shadows that spoke too loudly. And the stories had vanished. No one sat around the fire at night spinning tales. The elders no longer carried their memories in riddles. Instead, there was silence, thick and uneasy, as though everyone was waiting for something but did not know what. Anansi stepped forward, his bare feet pressing against the warm earth. He wore no crown, no robe, just a tattered woven shawl and a smirk that refused to fade in his satchel. He carried the last laughing flame, the spark of wild magic, stolen long ago from the forge of the sun. It giggled faintly, tickling his side through the cloth. It wanted to escape, to dance and set chaos free. But Anansi hushed it gently. Not yet, he whispered. They aren't ready. As he entered the village square, a few heads turned. Most quickly turned back. He was recognized not by face, but by feeling. A ripple in the air, a twitch in the bones, the way old scars ache before a storm. A girl perhaps 10 years old, perhaps older, watched him with quiet eyes. Her hair was tightly braided and her hands clutched a clay figurine shaped like a lion. She did not look away when he met her gaze. "You're the story man," she said plainly. "I am," Anansi replied with a slight bow. "And you're the one who remembers. Everyone says stories are for the weak," she said, as if testing him. "They say power lives in silence." Anansi chuckled, brushing dust from his sleeve. "Then I suppose they've never heard a story that made a king kneel, or a god weep." The girl tilted her head, unconvinced but curious. "Are you going to bring the stories back?" "No," Anansi said. "I'm going to make them impossible to ignore." That night, under the cracked moon, he found the old fire pit where the elders once gathered. The stones were still there, though half sunken into the earth. He sat in the center and pulled out the laughing flame. It squirmed, eager, hand bright, no larger than a mango pit but pulsing with mischief. With a flick of his finger, he dropped it into the pit and the world gasped. The flame did not burn red or orange. It shimmered in impossible colors: laughter blue, memory gold, and sorrow silver. It danced like a child who knew they could never be caught. It cackled and spun, and shadows leapt across the square. People came out of their huts, one by one, drawn not by fear but by forgetting, the kind of forgetting that itched at the back of your skull, that whispered, "You used to know this." Anansi began to speak, not with words at first, but with rhythm. He tapped the stones around him with his fingers, each beat echoing like footsteps in an empty hallway. He hummed, and the flame matched his tune. And then, with a voice that belonged to every uncle, grandmother, warrior, and thief who ever lived, he said, "There was once a time when stories were stolen." The crowd gathered. The girl with the lion figurine sat cross-legged in front of him. A man with a twisted leg leaned on a staff and closed his eyes. A mother holding a sleeping baby forgot why she had stepped outside. Everyone listened. He told them the story of the gods who grew jealous of laughter, of a king who banished joy because he could not understand it, of a spider who dared to weave tales between the stars because no one else would. He told them of the time he tricked the moon into singing, of the moment he outwitted death at a riddle contest, of the day he hid fire in a song so it could never be extinguished. And with every word, the laughing flame grew. It crept into hearts, kindled old dreams, and tickled closed minds. When he paused, the silence wasn't empty, it was reverent. Someone perhaps the girl, perhaps the man with the staff began to laugh. Softly at first, then louder and louder. Still, it was not mockery. It was remembering what it felt like to be alive. The next morning, the village was different. Children raced through the square with sticks for spears and capes made of blankets. Elders argued about which version of the story was truer. Someone painted the Baobab trunk with symbols long thought forgotten. But not everyone was pleased. The Council of Order men in pressed robes and women with eyes sharper than knives called for a meeting. They had spent years burying chaos, building quiet. Anansi's stories threatened everything. He was summoned to the central hut, where the roof was stitched from gold-threaded palm leaves. They sat in a circle, all severe and silent. He stood in the center, barefoot and smiling. "You are awakening things we buried for a reason," the eldest councilwoman said. "Then you buried them poorly." Anansi replied, "Because they heard me just fine. You are a danger." "I am a mirror," he said. "You just don't like what you see. You will leave," the youngest councilman commanded. "Now." Anansi bowed deeply. "Of course." He turned to go, then paused. "But just so you know," he added, looking over his shoulder, "stories don't live in storytellers. They live in ears." That night, 3 more flames lit across the village, one in the schoolhouse, one in the market, one in the hut of the blind musician. Each time, a story bloomed. The laughing flame had already passed from Anansi's hand. It now belonged to the people, and it would not be stopped.